many of you are here perhaps who did not attend the earlier meetings of what we had called the Architecture Collegium. I'll just give you 2 minutes of background as to why we are here this evening and what to expect in the future. Is that about 5-6 years ago, a number of architects of the city, many of them practitioners, some of them teachers, decided to start a discussion group because we felt that somehow the profession was sort of losing its energy in some form, and whether we could just discuss and see where the problems lay. We kept this discussion forum completely informal and open discussion forum going for some 5-6 years, and out of that forum, the most important thing that emerged was that we decided to start a museum of architecture, a national museum of architecture, which is something which is happening. But at the same time, we also felt that the architectural profession was perhaps needing to connect much more with society at large. And that it's not just the architectural profession, but all professions seem to be getting into more and more specialized modes of thinking and behavior, and getting a little removed from the nitty-gritty of daily life. But architecture is an ancient profession, ancient discipline really, and it's something which everybody has to face and interact with on a daily basis. We all live in buildings, in shelters, in gardens, in cities, which are the work primarily of the knowledge base of the architects. And of course now it's specialized into many areas. There are all kinds of urban planners and urban design and landscape and all kinds of other associated disciplines. But the root discipline, of course, is architecture. And somehow the idea that we felt was that the profession needs to connect much more with society at large. And so we've transformed what was a small group of serious-minded practitioners and teachers of architecture into now what we feel is an open forum where we would like to encourage members of society to come and interact, and we'd like to see the profession also coming. Today is the first evening of that series. Priyanka Jain, whom I can introduce as an urban planner, who has been researching into and practicing techniques of using new tools in urban planning, which basically have to do with better communication with the people we are planning for. Now, it's a very simple idea, but something which is not always available in our day-to-day practice. I won't say much more than that because, and I'd also like to say I've requested Priyanka, although I'm sure she has lots of things to say, to keep it to about half an hour or less, so that we have time to discuss. Primarily, we wish to engage with, or we wish to put the architectural profession and practitioners, teachers and all the rest of it in correspondence with society at large. It's only the first one. We'll have one every month. Next month is August 13th. And we will not always be having an architect or a planner to speak. We will invite other disciplines as well, and really try and develop the forum in a more open manner. So Priyanka, I was saying, is that she's done urban planning with this specialization, and today she's going to talk about better tools for urban planning. Yes.
So would you mind saying a line or two about yourself?
Myself, yes, I'm sorry, I should have. There's no one to introduce me. I'm an architect, and also I've been a teacher. I've been in practice since about 1972. I graduated in about, when was it, 1968, 66 actually. And I've founded a new school of architecture in Delhi, which used to be called the TVB School of Habitat Studies. It has now transformed itself into the architecture faculty of the Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University, what's called the University School of Architecture and Planning. I practice, I've built all over the subcontinent, and I'm still doing that in different parts. Also, I've been Greha, the organization of which I'm the president, which has collaborated with the India Habitat Center to start this series, is a non-for-profit charitable society which was formed in the mid-70s, registered in the mid-80s because we wanted to institute this new school of architecture. Otherwise, we weren't very particularly interested in making an institution out of it. But so since about 85, it's a registered charitable organization, and it is primarily a research organization which has done many reports for government agencies, by and large, HUDCO and INTAC and various government agencies, National Commission on Urbanization. So we are a group of architects and planners and social scientists, primarily, a very small group, but we have been working all these years, particularly with the marginalized. Our major concern is to work with the marginalized. Is that enough of a... My name is Munishwar Nath Ashish Ganju. Yeah.
Which of the four we should remember? Last name or
The
first
last name is the easiest, probably. I mean, I still got hair, but you can probably remember it. And surprisingly enough, there are other architects in the city of the same name. So I'm often confused like that. Otherwise, I'm known as Ashish. That is my family name, which everybody calls me by that name. Okay, Priyanka, it's your show, really, to start it. And I'm going to sit there.
Sitting right in this room. What I'm going to do tonight is share my work experience of working in India, Delhi and Mumbai particularly, and mix with some work experience from Rio and New York City. It's going to be a little messy, but I hope that you will grasp the underlying idea so that we can have a discussion thereafter. Why do we need better tools for urban planning? I firmly believe that the practice of urbanization requires tools to understand local values, communicate vital information, and reach shared consensus. Traditional planning tools do not always do that. They do not elicit genuine participation or surface the information needed to gain new insight. Creative tools can enhance engagement, add meaning to data, and create streamlined processes for a stronger awareness of citizen needs. It also helps align community perspectives with urban planning efforts. The first tool that I'm going to share with you is a place-based cultural festival for community-embedded conservation, proposed by an interdisciplinary team that includes Ashish Kanju, Henry, and sociologists such as Yasmin Arif and Sabyasachi. The tool was part of a proposal developed for INTAC. It had laid guidelines for community-embedded conservation approach for Mehrauli. Phool Walon Ki Sair is the annual community celebration that takes place in Mehrauli. In Yasmin own words, perhaps no other festival in the city or in the country even portrays a public and symbolic celebration of history, the present and an aspired future, particularly in the fraught terrain of Hindu-Muslim coexistence in the nation. Traced back to the later years of the Mughal Empire, it is an occasion that has continued over time to its current form, facing in this wake of nearly 2 centuries the changing times of the city, its people, and its politics, and most of all, a seeming legacy of communal harmony. It is remarkable that this festival is still celebrated every year in Mehrauli, even though its importance in community life has diminished in recent years. But more interestingly, along the route of Phool Walon Ki Sair are the important monuments of Mehrauli, as you can see in the map. The question we asked ourselves, an anchor of community expression and a representation of the settlement's mythology, can the festival be reimagined to make the community members the prime driver of conservation efforts in Mehrauli? The second tool is an annual festival for mediated negotiations and neighborhood consultation. It was envisioned in collaboration with an Indo-French collective, including Amrita Madan from Atelier Anonym and some French partners. It was proposed for Reinventing Dharavi competition launched by the Urban Design Research Institute last year. We are all too familiar with the gridlock created by the inhumane densification proposed in the Dharavi redevelopment plan. It was typical of an intractable controversy, where the parties involved hold conflicting frames as they determine what counts as a fact and what arguments are taken to be relevant and compelling. Our challenge was to introduce a new tool that could resolve the stalemate and start a series of fresh conservations in a democratic manner. Dharavi Festival is what we imagine. A step-by-step formation of successive and sustained negotiation. Through the festival, the community can both trigger and drive the reinvention of their habitat. So basically what we imagined was a referee chair, which is sitting right in different parts of the core heart of Dharavi. And people can just walk up these and see different plans that are envisioned for that particular neighborhood. It's really just to capture the social imagination. At the core of the idea is you need to have sustained negotiations, and what is the tool that you can use to capture that. The vision rethinks the concept of urban democracy through the Dharavi Festival, a strategy to formulate the local area plan of Dharavi in consultation with the local residential and working population. The third tool is a series of events and workshops for building an ongoing relationship of trust within the community. This year, I've had the privilege to work with the Delhi Urban Art Commission team on a redevelopment proposal for Lata Sarai, an urban village of South Delhi. The team is led by Ashish Kanju again, and our proposal focuses on sewage and sanitation issues, rainwater harvesting system, and parking schemes. Through various public consultation meetings with residents, we were able to establish trust with the community. However, despite increased participation of time, some stakeholders were still underrepresented, specifically women and youth. The women in the Lata Sarai community were not present at the meetings because of family responsibilities or norms that limit women's mobility. To promote youth voices, we developed a painting competition in collaboration with Anurag, a local NGO-run school. 30 students, boys and girls aged 10 to 14, drew their ideas for the Shiv Mandir Chowk that's situated in Lata Sarai and includes a local community park. The event also provided an environment that was conducive to invite women from surrounding blocks, which gave us the opportunity to capture their opinions on the proposal and quality of life issues in Lata Sarai. To maintain project momentum and longevity, we are now focused on enhancing the skills of active citizens so they can conduct the community surveys required for the pilot preparatory work. Events have become the methods to enhance residents' capacity to drive the development process themselves. Storytelling. In urban planning, we strive to foster participation among an area's diverse voices, often having to overcome conflict, language barriers, and information gaps to do so. We encountered one such challenge by researching to develop cultural programming around Profiteer Identity, a revitalizing historic plaza in downtown Rio. With so much cultural vibrancy and activity, Profiteer Identity is a classic example of a naturally occurring cultural district, an organic network of business clusters and economic activities that support cultural production and innovation. A typical case would be a Chandni Chowk situation in New Delhi, if you want to put it in context. In these districts, production is driven by collaboration between clusters that emerges from strong trust networks and knowledge sharing. But competition among local organizations for the same limited resources, tax credits for facade improvements, for instance, created barriers to effective communication, collaboration, and sustainable growth. So our focus became how to incentivize collaboration amongst local organizations to develop visioning and programming for the area's overall revitalization and gain. We tackled the challenge through a platform called As Crónicas Tiradentes, or ACT. ACT uses storytelling as an engagement tool to elucidate real people's narratives and networks, presenting anecdotal evidence of how organizations are interlinked and stand to gain from each other. Our inspiration came from As Crónicas Cariocas, a 20th century literary journalistic platform that grappled with the city's vast transformation through everyday stories. Similarly, ACT used colloquial language and graphic storytelling to translate complex information about social networks into chronicles or chronicas around the cultural industries and day-to-day activities in the Plaza Tiradentes neighborhood. Ana and Ernesto, for example, are user personas created from stories collected through a series of interviews with the local people. Their networks are representative of the daily cycles of economic activities and interpersonal exchanges in Plaza Tiradentes. So if you see, that's Ana's network that connects to different industries, Ernesto's network, and then how do they connect with each other. It's basically a chronicle that was made out of this. A Crónica de Tiradentes musical, ACT's first Crónica, specifically illustrated the music industry and its interconnectedness with adjacent clusters such as entertainment, theater, textile, art, and tourism industries. The Crónica and its background research is now being showcased at Studio X Rio in an exhibition. It is supported through workshop series with Tiradentes Cultural, an association of cultural organizations, to determine public space programming for Plaza Tiradentes. The goal is to spur discussion on how public space programming can stimulate the music industry. Light ethnographic methods. The next case is where we use lighter ethnographic methods to develop a programming concept for public space activation series along these privately owned public spaces along the Water Street corridor in New York. So there's a street in New York which is a retail district, and it required public space activation. And so we had to come up with programming for that area. To inform the concept, we conducted participant observation, behavioral mapping, and targeted pedestrian interviews to understand people's current perceptions and desire for Lower Manhattan open spaces. This allowed us to uncover local assets and stories for public space programming and place-based identity, which we call Came On, Water Street. The idea was to turn these spaces into social destinations for employees of Lower Manhattan as part of a larger initiative to revitalize Water Street, improve connectivity, and stimulate economic development of the area. By tapping into people's desire for the area, observing how people use space, and capturing how they wish to use space, we pinpointed gamification as a strategy for engaging employees on Water Street and enhancing social connectivity along the corridor. The last tool that I want to share with you is participatory design method that we use for asset-based revitalization in a neighborhood. Redstone Townhomes Neighborhood Association, it's a resident association in New Jersey, wanted to harness recent areas investments and do some environmental upgradation in the neighborhood. Our team applied participatory methods to discover programming opportunities. So basically what we did was use a chalkboard and had some cards, and people just created their own programming for different parks. And it was an interesting way to capture people's data through game. RTNA, which is the Resident Association, was able to leverage that kind of engagement to form partnership with resident associations and communicate with public agencies. For example, they had Comcast, which is a cable company, in the neighborhood, and through this engagement and through this activation, they were able to ask them to sponsor a Comcast Care Day where they paid for the adjacent school students to actually plant trees in the park that they wanted to revitalize. They also partnered up with a visual art school in the neighborhood, and the students came and painted the walls. So tools are limitless. They're crowdsourcing, wayfinding, data visualization, and mapping. Their value addition, if the situation is intractable, consensus can't be reached through reasoning alone, you could use these to reframe the situation or to drive action-based policies or arriving at public realm strategies. The challenges is the end client is always user. So how do you incorporate the biases of the actual client? Budget for such tools are usually low, and there is no set methodology. The actions are always incremental. Thanks.
I think we have to maintain some form to the school's discussion. It would be ideal if we were sitting in a circle or something like that, but I think that's not always possible. So we have mics and things, and
The mics are available. First of all, I'd like to say that the tools that you're talking about are something which, as you yourself said, planners have not been using. So there is, and it's quite clear that I'd like to tell you, for instance, that when we first started to go to Dadusarai, which is an example shown here, we presented to the local community some ideas. Without any prompting, they said, this is the first time that we know of any planners come and talk to us for whom the planning is being done. And this is not a surprising thing. There has been a kind of drifting away of the specialists from society. This is why today's talk has been organized. So I'd like to just say that thank you for actually focusing the issue onto the user, the community, in terms of the planning activity. And I'd really like to say that, I don't know how many of us here are actually architects and planners. I see a few familiar faces. But I think it is now necessary that we open the floor for some discussion. And I'll keep quiet.
yes, yeah. You want a mic? I think both दोनों ही ले जाओ भैया.
Thank you for a very stimulating lecture. Quite often, I also have been in multiple cities. Quite often I have noticed, though I've been in Delhi for a long time, the people in the city are not always connected. I don't know how much percentage of people that happens. There is a bit of an apathy, which city to city it varies. There is a sense of Amchi Mumbai, Amchi Pune, or whatever like that. Some places the sense of ownership is very high. Some places the sense of apathy and indifference, maybe because migration is much higher. So thanks to probably, I don't know, the smart cities and things like that, where everybody is beginning to talk about what can we do for city and things of that kind. You think some of this idea really going to happen? Because I know that Resident Welfare Association, so many things has happened in the past, Sheila Dikshit's time. But still it's too much of a top-down, and people do not feel up to it. They can suggest, they can participate, and things of that kind. You think that is something which is realistic? Because one has heard a lot of case studies abroad, but I don't know about India.
It's not essential that you answer the question.
Yeah.
Anyone in the audience. The idea is that I think there are enough experts and the people at the head of we are just sitting here just to give you some formal structure for the evening. Otherwise, we should be amongst you. So anyone would like to comment on this, and not one, but we can have many comments on it, because you are, I think, pointing out to some kind of essential truth. So
the question is, your question, if I were to say it in one line, is that would people participate?
Yeah, that is the center of all. See, the center of the thing was urban planning, listening from experts to the normal people, expanding the discourse. That is a good. But then she started, the overall central theme was participation and things of the kind, and then tools for participation and things of the kind. So by itself looks a great idea, but will it translate in a real world, or is it are we in this country participative for urban planning, or is it all?
So given the challenges that are already stated, that there is usually very low budgets and blah blah blah, as a practitioner, like those challenges exist, but the whole central theme of better tools for urban planning or creative tools for urban planning is that you make them creative enough so that you can pull in the people. Otherwise, you have traditional public consultation methods where a typical local authority official will come, he will just disclose the plan, people will listen to it, somebody will comment or not. You don't know where that kind of process go, right? The idea is to use games or storytelling or different creative tools, whatever suits that environment and that uses the local assets in order to engage the community. So why did we use Phool Walon Ki Sair in Mehrauli as the central theme? Because it already connects all the people. Why the Dharavi festival? Like, Indians love festivals, so do Mumbaikars, and so do Dharavians, So why can't we use something to capture the social imagination first, get them excited, so that they actually come and become a part of this very technical process. You have to simplify it for them, right?
There's another, I think, part of your question which is still remaining unanswered. The question is, will this happen? I think, Anna. So, but I think that question should be left unanswered, because we are just beginning to become aware of the fact that standard planning tools are not enough, and that unless we find ways of engaging, which is what your talk is about, new ways of engaging with the public, planners will become kind of redundant. This is already happening. Amongst us, the professional people who are doing it, people are finding that the value of architects and planners in normal society is coming down, and that people are now looking for all kinds of cliched alternatives like smart cities or any other, give it a name. It's becoming an ad copywriter's tool instead of being a technical exercise where there's a discipline, where there's a grammar, where there's a language, and there's a history to it. There's a vast history to architecture as a planning, as a discipline, which orders our lives. And that's kind of forgotten now. So the man with the money or the power can come and tell a planner or an architect what to draw so it can be made. This is completely cart before the house kind of idea. So we do not know how it will happen, but we do believe that it will happen, because considering the way in which society and communication within society is changing and becoming more and more open and rapid, it is inevitable. So in a way, there are more architects and planners here. I think somebody should say something about this. Will it happen?
Pointing at me. I've got another query, but
I would like to add to that, unless and until we start doing these things, we will not know whether it's going to happen or not. So if we believe firmly that if we go out there, stretch our hand out and see who can grab it, It's basically that. Is that right? Something of that sort, in the sense, unless and until we try and do something which will, be a kind of an out-of-box, action to sort of help this whole thing, because we have discovered the problem. Now the area of expertise of planners, there is the disconnection which has been found. And so there are planners like Priyanka who want to have a different kind of a methodology to see that it works. So those of us who have a certain idea of this kind of a creative approach, they should help her and join in the whole effort, to make it successful. Because there is right now Priyanka, then there'll be other people, then more people will join. So that's what is going to happen, I think. Yes, I'm very much positive about this.
So I'm gonna digress. Hi Priyanka, finally get to see some excerpts from your work. Yeah, good stuff. Just a query. So now this is, yes, there is a need for any brownfield project to develop tools. It's a great idea. But for example, can you share some thoughts? For example, the biggest problem with the feedback system of getting involved in any kind of, it's a great idea to get feedback from those who are going to, and they're going to be using and so on and so forth. So, but the feedback eventually comes back to you, a planner, or a body or group of people who are going to take that decisions, whether that tool worked or did not work. So, can you share some light? Just, I'm not saying whether that should happen or not happen. I'm just saying, of course, it does happen, but can you just share the light where you just plug in the feedback again into the original concept or original idea of the tool. Also, you judge whether your sample set of people that did contribute to the tool was, sorry to use the word, but did you get it a good enough sample set, maybe in numbers or quantity or diversity of demographics that you were looking at. So is there an example where this didn't work and then you had an alternate tool to plug in, or how do you complete just the entire loop again? So
Right. So there are a couple of examples, right? I think there are 2 or 3 parts to the query that you raised. One is, how do you get the feedback back, and there's this like technical person sitting and with their own like thinking processes, right? And I think there it is important to realize that it is local knowledge. It is not something that you just consider like, okay, it's A, like you don't take it and then convert it into recommendations. It's still mediated negotiations, and you need an expert to come in there and look at what makes sense and what does not, right? The example of where the feedback came and then actually converted into recommendations was actually Lado Sarai, where we did not look into the sewage system at all. And people, to start with, right, we were only focusing on open area and rainwater harvesting. But through public consultation meetings and through these series of events, it became very obvious that that was what was needed first before anything else can be done. So to have that kind of confidence speaks a lot. You could make arguments even with your client who could be a local authority or government. Say, even if you say I'm neutral, like as a, nobody is neutral, but like say a planner is neutral. He or she has to mediate with the local authorities, which is the government or any kind of corporate that might be willing to fund. So you can like use that evidence in order to argue that this is what the people want, right? About sample sets, so Water Street and Rio case, we had enough sample sets because there was also budget enough to like do that kind of
numbers, or how do you, what's the
so there's a methodology. You like look at a district, you see what is the target population, what is the sample, like those are traditional techniques, right? And then with that you decide like, okay, I need to get this demographic involved, let me use this strategy, this demographic. It's like you use different strategies so that you get the whole sample in, supported with short like traditional surveys as well, so as to get the main point. But in India, I haven't yet come across any work where we've been able to have like a critical sample set.
ask a question.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm actually not an architect. I'm a social scientist, and I'm writing my thesis on religious architecture in urban space spanning in Bombay. But what I wanted to ask you was, it's a very interesting category that you started with participation. But what if people want things that are not a part of your plan? In the sense that, like, I worked on Bhindi Bazaar, and the Bhindi Bazaar redevelopment plan is going on. So all the JJ crowd says that this is destroying the heritage of, the old buildings of, this is the old town of Bombay. It's kind of like the old Delhi. But the Bohras who are involved in the redevelopment plan articulate it as, nobody's cared about us for so long, so we're resurrecting these kind of new age buildings, and we're setting up a whole new sanitation system, and it's like a whole kind of a township they're trying to create, and just on one side of the JJ flyover. So the reason I'm asking you this is that what happens when when groups, so there's a lot of, India has a lot of shrines and temples, and because I work on religious architecture, so one side you can say it's a land grabbing technique, on the other side you can say people are homing that area, right? So it works at 2 meters at the same time. So as planners who are kind of getting into spaces which could be heritage or in the sense participatory, how do you finally kind of work through ideas of determining the aims of your aims and the community aims? And I think that's the kind of stuff that I'm interested in hearing more about. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a question that is always asked whenever you discuss community participation. Very good question, actually. I'll answer it, but does anyone else wants to answer it as well? Okay. So, we do not go into a situation without a frame, right? It's not a neutral zero condition, right? There's always some kind of brief or programming, at least as a practitioner, to go into an area and to do something, right? Rest is incremental, yes, and it should be that way for it to be positive and sustainable. There are two ways to look at the situation that you've suggested. One is what already exists, and that is an asset for the community, and how do you integrate it? So what are those like negotiations that are happening on ground with people? And I always say negotiations, right? In community participation. So it's not like you're just gathering feedback. You're doing a negotiation. There's a consensus that is being reached, and that is the challenge of community participation. So they, in a room of like 80 people or 50 people, there would always be different things that people want. So how do you come to that, right? And it becomes even more difficult when reasoning can't reach it, which is the case of the temple, where different values affect the situation. So it's even more important in that case to use some kind of creative tool so that people can see the situation differently. They can see it with a reframe in their mind. Okay, there is issue with this particular problem. How do you do those communications which could probably make them aware of the situation without explicitly saying it? I've not done that yet in my practice, but I've seen some examples which I can probably share later. But like there are ways of like encountering such issues.
Do you want to continue that point, or?
No, it's fine. I mean, I can
Do
carry
you
on,
want
but-
do you want to continue that one?
No, I can actually carry on, but it's fine. But
It's all right, this is, it's all right to ask a question again and again or different ways. We all want to do that, really. But there's somebody who wants to also have something. Is it connected with what she said, or you want to?
Not exactly.
No,
So
I'm also seeking answers. No, I
Can
don't
you-
have it all figured out here.
Can you hold on? We
Yeah,
develop
I
this
will-
a
I
little
will.
further. I think there are some very important issues which are emerging out of this, to do with, how disciplines work and the question of faith and beliefs. Do you want to enlarge?
No, it's just this idea of, the way I'm an anthropologist, as you might have figured. So there's this idea of placemaking, and people will, in a particular area, you can plan a lot of things around it, but there will always be this notion that there is either a local mosque, which is part of their kind of temporal everyday universe, or a temple that they pass by, which then they start associating with the sense of that they now belong to this place, And I worked in the old town of Bombay, and I worked on 3 mosques and a synagogue, and I was basically locating all my work around religious architecture and how it became a very important aspect of placemaking. Now, we can say that this area needs to be redeveloped, and there's a cluster development thing that was introduced in Bombay, and the Bindi Bazaar plan is based on that. But on one side, the priorities I think sometimes that we go in with the heritage and conservation may not at all be the priorities of those who live there, because they actually don't want to be conserved. They want to change things. They don't want to live in old buildings. They want to live in newer buildings or whatever. And I think, I don't know, I've never been in the location of planners or architects, but I think it's participation, what is the idea of the social itself is very difficult to grapple with when these choices come forth.
I think, you're picking on a very kind of sensitive thing here, which is to do with which is why we are meeting really, is how do people interact with specialists in terms of creating their own environment. And that's what the whole thing is about. I've always thought that, everybody finds the town of Venice in Italy, it's as the kind of apex of architectural conservation, if you like, heritage, development, all the rest of it. And I always find it extraordinary why that the people in that town allowed all those buildings to be kept the way they are. I worked in the University of Venice with conservation people, and nobody has quite an answer to this. So I think this whole thing, as an anthropologist, you have to come in a more active manner and less on the defensive, and actually try and identify those aspects of our daily life. Religion is a very important one. That's what holds it all together, really, especially in a country like ours. Sorry, I have to close this. And this connection has to be found. We used to have it earlier, it's quite clear. And today, the whole notion of heritage, for instance, and conservation has to be challenged, because we have been handed down an idea about what constitutes conservation, which, I will put it in plain words, is a completely elitist and alien idea. In a country like ours, where we have a very different sense of time, how can we accept this kind of museumization, if you like, or mummification of entire precincts, which is what's going on in the name of heritage conservation? And whether it's heritage or whether it's conservation, I challenge both of these ideas. We have to redefine heritage, we have to redefine conservation. And therefore, I would say that it is necessary, for instance, the things that Priyanka talked about. First, I think the Mehrauli example, it was a challenge, we are still doing it, from Chairman Intac, who told me, he says, I'm completely at my wit's end. I mean, this whole organization, which is, a very prestigious organization, it's countrywide, It was set up with great aspirations. Even today, it commands respect all over the country. One of few organizations, NGOs, who command respect all over the country. I mean, 100 crores was given to it 2 years ago by the finance minister to make it into an institution of excellence. It isn't even an institution, you know. And the chairman is telling me that how can we make conservation something which belongs to the community? This is what we're trying to do in Mehrauli. What we call a community embedded approach to conservation. You're not conserving monuments. That's the last thing you do. What you do first is conserve social relations. That's one thing. And then in a country like ours, you also have to make the place clean. If you can't take care of your sewage, why are you going to look after this old building? Who's going to look after it? The ASI? What resources do they have? So you see, you could do it in Bombay, because Bombay is, of course, a place where raising money is simpler than in many other places. And so, you know, you've done a great job of the Kalagoda area. Terrific effort, and absolutely be commended. But how many places can you repeat that? It is a one-off. And so therefore, I think the questions you're raising are very important questions. And they are central to the issue that we are trying to find. But I think the answers have to come from your disciplines, you know, or a combination. I mean, maybe the two of you should work together for a few years and then write a paper about it, and we'll all learn how it happens.
One example perhaps which is closer to the situation that you mentioned was ACT that we did in Rio. It wasn't religion, but it was basically, there was a lot of money being put into facade development, like conservation, and then what was happening was gentrification, entertainment coming in, but not really looking at the clusters of the social network. And there I actually collaborated with an anthropologist, who's my partner. We looked at the social networks between different industries, industrial clusters, so they're like small clusters, like, which is what the case would be in the Bhindi Bazaar. And from there we developed these personas, right? The chronicle that we use to engage with people. And what ended up was that we formed this, like, a local cultural association was formed, and they created this programming for the plaza that is at the center, and it would provide opportunities for different people from industries to showcase their work and their talent, and you can connect them with like micro funding organizations and stuff. So to a certain extent, there was this opportunity to look at economic development a little differently than just traditional facade redevelopment.
Yeah, something connected,
Yes. I mean,
which I just thought of.
Please.
In our library here in Habitat Center, Resource Room, we have a beautiful map, big map of Shahjahanabad from 1840s, created by two researchers from University of Bonn. It's so beautiful to look and understand and interpret. And right in the auditorium above a few years back, we had films on Shahjahanabad and its glorious years. So when I look at those films and I look at that map, which we see every other day, do you think there's any hope that area of Sharjah, and like Chandni Chowk was the Moonlight Square, and when you go through the culture that existed at that time, you know, Red Fort part is preserved, conserved reasonably, but when you come down to Chandni Chowk, Moonlight Square, there is hardly a Moonlight Square. And we've tried cycling around the area several times, even trying to understand, do you think there's any hope this will get restored at all?
You want city romantics here. Romanticize about a city being brilliant.
And the kind of stories around it are fascinating. So we've had these presentations which are Alice in Wonderland, but can it be somewhat close?
Did you see in the newspaper, I just saw a photograph in the newspaper just a couple of days ago, where in the Chunnamal Haveli, there was a storytelling session going on. Now you should hear this too. Have you seen that picture? Mm-hmm. Suhail Hashmi, who is a historian, Delhi University, I think, isn't he? Isn't he here today? No, he should have been here. We'll call him to the next meeting, definitely. And he and some others, there's some organization which has started this, and they're going to do it regularly. They're going to tell stories about their life in Sharjah. So this is an example, exactly an example of what she's talking about. In order to revive interest in putting together the old fabric, which you're so, eloquently trying to describe, really. Yes, it is a romance, and it should be there. I put the flag up for it. It should be there, because unless you do that, people will not be able to appreciate even the value of doing a thing like that. And it will take time, but there is obviously, over the years, when I came back to live in Delhi after a long gap in the late 60s, and what I wanted to do, I'd been living in Europe, I wanted to immediately go and live in Chandni Chowk. I said, whatever it is, this is the part of the city which one must live in, All the rest of it is all sort of, kind of facades, and it's very difficult, it's not easy at all. But from that time on to now, we are, I think, getting closer. I must also say that from my own experience, the whole business of city building or city renovation or city transformation is an extremely slow process. It takes generations. And I think one of the great advantages of our culture is that we make it even slower.
No, but as some German put it, that as good Hindus, you have several rebirths. So you did not.
We have a lot of time to look up. Yeah,
next one.
Yes. What does happen in this process at a more practical level is that your appreciation of your position, your state of being, becomes deeper. Wherever you may be, this whole business of placemaking, for instance, what is place? Place has a lot to do with time. If you're in the place for long enough, it is placemaking. The making of the place is to do with time, not just with space. You see, so anyway, one can go on like this. It's getting abstract, and I don't want to make it abstract because, I'm sure, but these are extremely important questions, and then these are the kinds of questions which planners and architects are not asking enough of. Hence, the need was felt for this kind of thing.
One small suggestion before I close on
Yes,
this.
of course,
You see, there is a lot of economic compulsion in those areas which would dominate any kind of restoration process or even transformative process. So do you think you could have lovers of Shahjahanabad kind of, which would be active, which would promote activism to actually have this move towards restoration?
I believe that's happening. So I'll contact Sohail Hashmi in the next few days, and I will ask him how other people can join into this. And if I have your number and all, I'll put you in touch with him.
Yeah.
I believe I saw a picture in the paper,
Yeah.
and I know a little bit Sohail Hashmi. He's a very serious guy, and he's a very good historian, and he's a great storyteller. So, this is a very good idea to get people together on this basis. And Junnamal Haveli is one of the great old Havelis of Old Delhi.
Yes.
And I knew the Junnamal family a little bit long years ago. And it's wonderful that they've kept that Haveli going. They're still living there, and etc. So, and all you need is one person, really, to start the movement. So I'll put you in touch with him. Yeah.
But this kind of movement usually gets restricted to. This kind of movement usually gets restricted to a certain number of people, and it's a very small percentage that we're talking about. So how do you actually make this more inclusive, especially when you start talking about fabrics of time, making a city or making a place? We're really not being that inclusive, something like Junnamal Haveli, like how many people might have attended it? Might be just 20, 30, probably 50, but that's not an entire population. Delhi has a lot more population. So, how do we start making it more inclusive?
She's looking for a revolution.
No, because that's really important, when we start talking about a place.
I think it's a very good question, and I think it needs to be addressed frontally. We can't sidestep it. But before we address it, Rohit has a...
Okay, I'm an architect, and during college, through some friends and teachers and all, we started conducting heritage walks. And this is 20 years back. and no one had, and I think I conducted a few heritage walks in Mehrauli 20 years back, not for architecture colleges, but for other colleges like LSR and others. And at that time, those people never knew what heritage was or what our own cities have to offer, both as monuments or spaces or places. So that was 20 years back or 18 years back. But if you Google today, there are at least 200 walks in the city happening every weekend. So I think you have to start somewhere and it catches on, and once it's I think what a good idea is, it spreads very fast. So I think it has to start and it will spread.
I think to address the question frontally, unless somebody else wants to, I can give you some examples. Because, again, an example, to be, as you say, inclusive, it's very good. I mean, from Chunnamal Haveli, I'll go to a Delhi slum, an unauthorized colony, where this notion of how do you actually work with everyone is still working. I had to go and live there some 15 years ago, and I found that this so-called unauthorized illegal colony, a slum really, I had to live there by chance, by accident if you like, or by compulsion. And having done that, as the months went by, I found that the people were really extremely cooperative, friendly, much more than the upmarket South Delhi colony I'd spent many decades living in. And as I looked closer, I found that they were people, they were making their own city. Instead of the government making a city for them, people were making their own, because there was no government. It was against the law in any case. And they were all, could be demolished any day. And they were, so we started a movement there. And a movement meaning we started I started getting people together, and we started something called a kind of Vikas Samiti, trying to find everybody, all the different constituents you can always tell in the neighborhood. And the advantage of a neighborhood which is also marginalized is very good, because it's like you are much more in contact with all kinds of people, and sort of social barriers. In fact, when you're on the margins, social barriers are not that critical. So the first answer is you've got to get to the margin instead of being at the center. Long years ago, I was told this by a friend, you either get to the center or you join the bees. The point here being that you become queen bee, or you're just a drone, you're just doing menial work. Now, we try to reverse this thing, that when you get to the margins, and this is a fact of kind of modern life somehow, even in our own discipline, when Louis Kahn took the services to the margins of the building, he suddenly produced a new dimension, architectural dimension, which is completely modern, and everybody had to follow that without his saying so. He was not a professor, really. But, everybody followed. So this business of getting to the margins, to my mind, is a very important thing today. If you're talking about inclusiveness, that's what it's about. Find the margin and sit there, if you like. And then you can develop that. I mean, anyway, I won't go into politics, but this is the margin you have to find. This is happening more and more. Today, tools, IT tools is making it easier. If you like, one of these days, maybe I thought one of these evenings, we'll see a film. We started working, and we thought that it was very important to record what we were doing, because we didn't know what we were doing. We were going from day to day, trying to find method in our own madness. We recorded it. And one very bright young filmmaker, very serious guy, makes feature films, He made a 50-minute documentary for PSBT on it. And it can easily, it's been screened at the IHC. Formally, it was done about 2 years ago when the filmmaker was there and we had a panel discussion, you know, the usual thing, K.T. Ravindran and this and that, you know, all the local sort of, you know, policy geeks, what are they called? Something like the usual guys, you know. So we had all that, but we can see it again. It's a document about people and how they actually, you know, make their city. So this, I think, is a very important question. And again, it has no easy answer, and there is no time limit to it. But we can begin it. I am now calling this whole business of participative planning, I've given a new term. I was asked to speak about this experience somewhere in Bikaner, and they said, what are you going to talk about? So I called it, we will call it Shahri Vikas Apne Haath, which in English translates as urban renewal by citizens. It's not for them. Participatory planning still to me reeks of a gift that you're giving someone, a dole. We are allowing you to participate in the making of your own city. It's complete nonsense, you know. And the fact is that people are making their city all the time. It's planners who don't know that. Everybody else knows it. So, you know, the inclusive thing is a question of training the planner. I've asked this question at the last big meeting of the National Institute, what is it, Urban NIUA dialogues which are going on, Urban Affairs. And Katie was actually giving this thing and talking about how these wonderful big programs that the government is now making of spending lakhs of crores on these missions, 4 of them, 7 actually. And, but everything converges finally to the local area, urban local body. And he described how the urban local body officials are so ill-equipped to handle anything of this nature. But I wanted to know why the policy planners who are looking down at the urban local body people and saying they have to be trained, who's training the policy planners? Because they've been making a complete mistake. In 60 years today in Delhi, I could not leave my house because of the rain in the morning for 4 hours. And I kept telling my wife, who was getting very concerned, that look, don't forget that we are living in the capital city of this great superpower, India. And it is the 21st century. It is not the 10th or the 15th century, it's the 21st century, and we are living right in the capital city of this country. That's where it's at. So who's training the policy planners? And that's what really we're concerned about. Only we can train them. And I believe that every situation, you know, you're asked talking about placemaking and all the rest of it, you know, people, the conservation, heritage, people are the best teachers, ordinary people. I have found that in 40, 50 years of work throughout the subcontinent. I don't know about the rest of the country, but in this subcontinent where we have a civilization we've managed to sustain over thousands of years, with still core values intact. I mean, my grandfather had the same core value, my grandmother, and whatever I can remember, my great-grandmother, she had the same values. So how do we do it? To me, this is a big question. But what I found from my own experience is that you go around the country and work with people, people tell you what to do, which is quite correct if you want to listen. You've got to have the ability to listen to what people around you are saying. And somehow this whole expertise thing, you know, why can't experts make our lives better? That's the question. Whether they're doctors, whether they're lawyers, whether they're architects and planners, whether they're chartered accountants.